Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. Today is March 4th, 25, excuse me, and tonight our class will be on Women Against Fascism. As always, the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies is a Party of Communist USA sponsored school, so this is not a party school, so this does allow us to have a wide range of views and discussion on topics. Alrighty, so with that, we shall get started. Today's class will be breaking down into five major sections. Rosa Luxemburg against the Fascist-Enabling SPD, or the German Social Democratic Party. The women Partisans in Spain against Franco. The Mirabal sisters against Trujillo. World War II, the Soviet Night Witches. And Vilma Castro against the fascist Batista. And with that, we will start with Rosa Luxemburg. You guys have the floor. Go ahead.
Keep in mind, one, there were more that we could have put in, but, we are limited with time.
So to start off with Rosa Luxemburg's political career, she was the first woman in the world to be awarded a doctorate in political economy, and she was the leading theoretician of the social democracy of the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania party. She moved to Germany in 1898 to be at the center of the party's struggle, and she was active in the left wing of the SPD, where she strongly opposed Bernstein's revisionism theory. And she became lifelong friends with Clara Zetkin at this time. You can see pictured on the right. So during World War I in 1900, Luxemburg published articles attacking German militarism and imperialism. Foreseeing the coming war, she wanted to organize a general strike to prevent it. The SPD leaders refused, and when war broke out in 1914, the SPD majority supported it and voted in favor of the Reichstag funding the war. They agreed to a truce with the imperial government and promised that SPD-controlled labor unions would refrain from strike action for the duration of the war. Luxemburg contemplated taking her life as the revisionism she fought for 15 years had won. And there's a picture of protesters against World War I at the 1918 Women's Peace Conference in The Hague. So, setting the stage for the Weimar Republic, in November 1918, the Council of the People's Deputies was formed as a provisional government following the collapse of the German Empire at the end of World War I. It was led by Friedrich Ebert, who was once a student of Luxemburg, of the majority Social Democratic Party, the MSPD, and Hugo Haas of the more left-wing Independent Social Democratic Party, the USPD. With 3 representatives from each party. You can see in the right, there's Friedrich Ebert, pictured above, and Hugo Haas, pictured below. The MSPD was a right-leaning, supporting a social democracy. In a clandestine agreement, the Ebert-Groener Pact was signed, in which Groener, the general of the German army, assured Chancellor Ebert of the loyalty of the armed forces. In return, Ebert promised to take prompt action against leftist uprisings, which will be important later. And meanwhile, the USPD pursued their revolutionary goals of nationalizing property, stripping power from the military, and establishing a Soviet republic. In January 1919, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht formed the Communist Party of Germany, KPD. And Luxemburg supported the KPD participating in the Weimar National Assembly elections, but unfortunately she was outvoted, and the KPD actually boycotted the elections. The KPD and USPD, along with the Revolutionary Stewards, were the primary organizations which would later form the Revolutionary Committee. And there's a poster showing Liebknecht urging people to join the KPD. So, with the start of the Spartacus uprising, started in December 1918 over a dispute. A dispute arose over back pay owed to the People's Marine Division, and as a result, Police Chief Eichhorn of the USPD was dismissed. The USPD and KPD interpreted Eichhorn's dismissal as an attack on the revolution. This became the immediate trigger of the uprising, which occurred in January 1919. The protests exceeded expectations of scale and turnout, in numbers exceeding 100,000. The Spartacus League's publication, The Red Flag, called for the KPD to occupy the press buildings. So the failure of leadership, the Revolutionary Committee could not agree on how to proceed. Representatives were divided. Some called for armed insurrection, while others pleaded for negotiations with Ebert. Liebknecht, against the advice of Luxemburg, supported the plan to unleash a civil war. The committee was unable to signal to the thousands of demonstrators waiting for direction in the streets on what they should do. As a result, protesters went home on the evenings of both 5th and 6th January without having accomplished anything. On January 6th, the Revolutionary Committee began negotiating with Ebert through the mediation of USPD leadership. The negotiations failed due to the unwillingness of either side to compromise, and so the chance for a nonviolent settlement of the conflict was lost. So the bloody end, in response to the uprising, Ebert ordered the Freikorps, a far-right paramilitary formation, to suppress the protesters. The insurgents were not prepared for organized battles. In most cases, they surrendered voluntarily. Despite this, the military killed over 100 insurgents and an unknown number of uninvolved civilians in the area. Tragically, Luxemburg and Liebknecht were arrested and tortured before being executed by the Freikorps. Their murders were staged as an assassination. Despite being utilized by the leader of the Weimar Republic, many Freikorps despised the Republic and were involved in assassinations of its supporters, later aiding the Nazis in their rise to power. And there's a newspaper on the right. Initially, the propaganda was spread that Luxemburg was killed by a mob before a proper investigation revealed the true cause of her death. So lessons learned: had the Spartacist uprising been more organized and better planned, a successful revolution could have been the outcome. With the crushing of the rebellion, the stage was set for the breakdown of democracy under SPD leadership and the takeover of the Nazi Party. As Clara Zetkin would write just 4 years later in her pamphlet, The Struggle Against Fascism, it is not at all the revenge of the bourgeoisie against the militant uprising of the proletariat. In historical terms, viewed objectively, fascism arrives much more as a punishment because the proletariat has not carried and driven forward the revolution that began in Russia. And there's a quote from Luxemburg on the right: "We will be victorious if we have not forgotten how to learn."
Thank you, comrade. And with that, we will break for a discussion round. So if you have a question or a comment, Secretary Emeritus Angelo, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, this is very important. The book, The History of Germany, that New Outlook puts out, goes into this. Very important. The reason why in World War, when the Nazis were rising up, communists could not have alliances with the SPD, the socialist movement, was because of the history of what they did to us. They were the ones that murdered our leaders, Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. It was not the Nazis who did it. It was the Social Democrats. Remember that. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade Angelo.
Yeah, I know the Freikorps were groups of post-World War I right-wingers, militia, but did they have the power to arrest? Does anybody know if the government gave them police powers? How were they able to arrest the Luxemburg if they were just a militia? Thank you.
Yeah, so it seems like, oh gosh, I forgot the name of this individual, but they took direct orders from the government, actually. I don't know if it was Ebert specifically who gave them the orders, but they were given orders to capture Liebknecht and Luxemburg, and they actually, I think Ebert himself had spies keeping track of the Revolutionary Committee and did order the arrest of all of the committee's members. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were given the right to, I mean, they were out in the streets killing people. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were given the authority to arrest people as well.
Thank you, comrade. Just as a note, the book that Angelo was referencing is The Lesson of Germany by Gerhard Eisler Albert, Norden Albert, and Schreiner. Or, okay, it's Gerhard Eisler, Albert Norden, and Albert Schreiner. And you can get that on New Outlook Publishers. As well, one note I wanted to say about Rosa Luxemburg that I've always found fascinated was she had a cat. She and Lenin exchanged correspondence. They've actually met in person a couple times. Lenin absolutely loved Rosa Luxemburg's cat, but in typical cat fashion, Rosa Luxemburg's cat hated Lenin, but loved Rosa Luxemburg. Comrade, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love it. I think the big takeaway, along with what he said, is Clara Zetkin's quote. She says, "It was not the bourgeois revenge. It was punishment for the working people that they did not continue the revolution of 1917. I don't know if anybody caught that or not, but I really thought that that was quite an interesting report, as the takeaway shows. A revolution could have happened, but it was betrayed. So I thought that was very interesting, something I had not known about till tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade. Comrade, you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out some ideological differences that Luxemburg had from Lenin. She actually disagreed with him on, I guess, the concept of nations. She also disagreed with him on the idea of having a vanguard party. She believed that the general strike was like the highest form of revolutionary like action. So she was very much all for spontaneous actions. I mean, even I think even days before her death, there was some quote saying where she admitted the leadership had failed, but that she said, oh, new leaders will arise from the masses, and it's up to you to carry out the revolution. I mean, she truly believed that with all these people rising up, that it was inevitable that the revolution would be carried out. But
60
unfortunately,
seconds.
it just goes to show that from the way the uprising ended up going, that you really do need more than just spontaneous action. You really do need a organized vanguard of the working class to lead the people in the right direction.
Thank you, Comrade. If there are no other questions, hands, or comments, we will return to the presentation. Let me just pull that right back up again. So our next section will be World War II.
All right, thank you. What I want to express too is, if you notice, we're starting, oh gosh, at 1920, and now we're jumping into 40s, and then we'll be jumping into the 60s. And what I want to express is it's about time we got more into our own time frame. And I have to be honest that I didn't know about all of this, obviously, when I was growing up. I'm sure Angelo will give some good points. As far as World War II goes, to shorten it, because we do have a lot to talk about. In World War II, there was so much going on, and women were involved. So a lot of this, is missing. So I just want to express that to you. For the Soviet Union effort, we had the Night Witches, and I wanted to give them a little bit of promotion this time around. But the Soviet Union also had women snipers, and Soviet women battled the anti-aircraft cannons in Stalingrad, because it took 3 days for the Red Army to come in. And so, of course, most of those people were dead by the time the Red Army came. Just want to let you know there's a heck of a lot going on. So these are the Night Witches, and I find this, and you'll see, interesting from our current perspective in 2020. Okay? All right, so the little thing on the side left is Tonight We Fly. And again, Claudia Hagren had written a book. There have been books written about the Soviet Night Witches. So here's a lot of this is quotes, obviously, from authors and writers that really were very interested in this group. They flew under the cover of darkness in bare bones plywood biplanes. They braved bullets and frostbite in the air. They were feared and hated so much by the Nazis that any German airman who downed one was automatically awarded the prestigious Iron Cross medal. All told, the pioneering all-female 588th Night Bomber Regiment dropped more than 23 tons of bombs on Nazi targets, and in so doing, they became a crucial Soviet asset in winning World War II. The regiment consisted of women aged 17 through 26. These were 400 that were selected from 20,000 volunteers. All right. They underwent a highly compressed education. They were, as recruits, expected to learn in a few months what it took most soldiers several years to grasp. Keep in mind, the soldiers were either pilots or navigators or maintenance or ground crew. Every single one of those 400 women had to know all four jobs because it was the women that did all four jobs. Just need you to understand that. The ground crew, night witches all, would repair any damages, refuel the planes, and load more bombs for, in quotes or italics, next sortie. Sometimes there were 3 sorties in one night. All right, next slide.
Just a quick note, what made them partially so terrifying for the Nazis is with these biplanes, they would basically run the engine until they got close enough to the target, shut off the engine to where they were silent, drop their bombs, and then glide away.
Yeah, we talk about that in another slide,
Okay,
a little
sorry.
more specifics. No problem. I know it's exciting. I read this stuff and I still get very enthusiastic. All right. The Germans nicknamed them the Nachtwechseln, or night witches, which of course was a derogatory term. Because the whooshing noise their wooden planes, their silent wooden planes made, resembled that of a sweeping broom. This sound was the only warning the Germans had. The planes were too small to show up on radar or on infrared locators. They never used radios, so radio locators couldn't pick them up either. They were basically ghosts, and we go into it a little bit more. The resources are unbelievable. Due to both the planes' limited weight capacity and the military's limited funds, the pilots also lacked other luxury items that their male counterparts enjoyed. Instead of parachutes, which were too heavy to carry, radar, guns, and radios, they were forced to use more rudimentary tools such as rulers, stopwatches, flashlights, pencils, map, and compasses. And by the way, they did the pencils as double duty. Those were their eyebrow liners. All right, next stage. All right. The military, unprepared for women pilots, offered them meager resources. Flyers received hand-me-down uniforms from male soldiers, including oversized boots. They had to tear up their bedding and stuff them in their boots to get them to fit. All right. The military provided them with outdated Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes. These were 1920 crop dusters. We are talking 1942. All right. So that's what they had to use. These light two-seaters, open cockpit planes were never meant for combat. It was like a coffin with wings, said Prouse. He's one of the authors there. It was made out of plywood with canvas pulled over, and the aircraft offered no protection from the elements. Flying at night, pilots endured freezing temperatures, wind, and frostbite. In the harsh Soviet winters, the planes became so cold, just touching them would rip off bare skin. All right, and this is a picture of a briefing. It's on the field, and it is just before their flights, as there was no radio contact during their strikes. And as all of you know, that is unbelievable, because as soon as you go into a plan, you know the plan disappears. So they had their briefings, and that is all. So they were on their own, and obviously, I think there's a lot of communication among all the crews, but it doesn't state it. All right, next slide. The planes, each with a pilot up front and a navigator in back, traveled in packs. The first planes would go in as bait, attracting German spotlights, which provided much needed illumination. These planes, which rarely had ammunition to defend themselves, would release a flare to light up the intended target. The last plane would idle its engines and glide in darkness to the bombing area. It was this stealth mode that created their signature witch's broom sound. So that's how they did it. Altogether, these daredevil heroines flew more than 30,000 missions in total, and that was from 42 to 45, or about 800 per pilot and navigator. And you can imagine some of them are 3 sorties a night. And one of the, I think she was 17 years old when she joined. She actually had under her belt over 1,000 missions in those 3 years. Okay, from the first mission in 1942 to the end and to the end of their commission in 1945. Sorry about the errors there. They lost, and I can't believe this, a total of 30 pilots out of 400 pilots. Now I say pilots, but there were crews. And 24 of the flyers were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Bad news. Some downed crews, so that's about 30, were tortured before execution. In this day and age, we always hear about extractions. Well, there were no extractions. They had no parachute. They had no extractions. When he went down, they already knew that they were dead. Okay? All right, and here's a picture. The all-female 588th Night Bomber Regiment was decommissioned 6 months after the war, so they only had 2 or 3 years of existence. All right, you want to go to the next one? Oh, okay. Discussion.
All right, and we will break for a next round of discussion. So,
yeah, just wondering how it came to be in the first place. Was it something about the work or something about women's intuition or something that made women? Yeah, I'd love to know.
All right. Yeah. They had their own, what do you call it? What was it? Earhart. They had a proud woman that was a pilot and had many honors and all. She kept on receiving letters from all these women that they wanted to join. They wanted to do something for Russia. I mean, talk about for your country. There are 20,000 applicants, okay? So she went through them, and that's how she got the 400. Now, she had to go to Stalin because Stalin was not interested. You can tell. He just said, fine, do what you want. You'll get the dredges. I mean, they didn't get anything, nor did they obviously get any respect from the male pilots. They had a hell of a time as far as harassment goes, which is to be expected. And so what I am always flummoxed is, first there was 20,000 applicants. They had 400, and what they were able to do. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Somebody knows more history, but I remember being told that the USSR was the first nation to allow women to serve alongside men. I assume with what I've learned now, it's mostly in the military. So again, yeah, it's kind of reflecting question. Why were they treated so poorly if I was always told that women were allowed to serve alongside men in the Soviet Union.
In this case, it's always grudgingly. That's the first thing. Very chauvinistic tendencies, even in the time of war, which is unbelievable. Now, when your back is against the wall and all you have are women to man the anti-aircraft equipment, what are you going to do? You're not going to have them, cheering you on. You're putting them to work. And yes, they worked alongside. It's the case of, what do you call it? Desperation. And most of them died. And it was the same with this. I mean, and one of the things I will say this, it's just my opinion. The Soviet Union really does raise, or did, and I think it was the generation that it was educated just before the war, 20 years of Stalin education. They were just unbelievable. And there's always stories, unbelievable stories, not only about the women, but the men. Yeah.
Thank you. It should also be noted that some of the most distinguished Soviet snipers were women. They were actually found to have more patience than their male counterparts and waiting for targets to be available. And then I forget who was the older lady who wanted to fight the Nazis so bad that she emptied her life savings, bought a tank, and told Stalin, like, either you assist me with this or I'm going to just take this tank myself and march over there, and did it. Stalin was so impressed.
I love it.
Gave her a crew, and she basically died in battle fixing her own tank. And
Yeah. Yeah, this is the kind of stories we want to hear. So yeah, if you can put anything down in the chat, because we want to.
we'll see if I can find that name.
Yeah, we want to preserve these. I mean, they're fantastic stories. But go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention this. The conversation reminds me of the Spanish Civil War documentary that the party showed at a PSMLS class, where a lady was talking about having gone over to help fight in the war, and they did not want to let her do any dangerous actions. So she goes to her comrades and she says, "You're supposed to be leftist, and you're acting like chauvinists," and it basically shamed them, and they ended up letting her do. So I feel like this seems to be a common thing where like the theory is good and we have the right ideas, but sometimes the members and the masses, we have to like help them along.
Mhm. Yeah, in the midst of war, they still can be chauvinistic, ridiculous, but that's the way it is. And the person that I can't remember her name, but their Earhart, she was the one that really oversaw everything. But there were also men there in some of the pictures under the night witches. There are some men there, not many, but they were. And I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I actually found the name of this person. This was Maria Vasilyevna Oktyabrskaya. So she had initially been evacuated to Siberia when the Eastern Front of the Second World War started. She learned that her husband had been killed fighting the Nazis near Kiev in August 1941. When she got the news, she sold all her possessions to donate a tank to the Red Army, and she requested the tank, a T-34, be named the Fighting Girlfriend, and that she would be allowed to drive it. They agreed to this. She enrolled in a 5-month tank training program and ended up joining the 26th Guards Tank Brigade, part of the 2nd Guards Tank Corps, in September 1943 as a driver and a mechanic. And she basically fought multiple battles, and she died on the front on January 17th, 1944. She was posthumously given Hero of the Soviet Union in recognition of her bravery.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is more or less an ideological conversation or assessment that we don't have to get into because I think we're wrapping up discussion right now. But, there are circumstances where women are put into battle and it's not a good thing. I'm pretty sure in World War I, around the cusp of the October Revolution, the provisional government was drafting female battalions. And it wasn't because they're like, oh, equal rights. They're like, we are really desperate. So I guess you got to be dialectical about it as far as other things. Where is the line between desperate battle measures and progressive combat policies? I have no idea. I think we can rest assured that the Soviet Union was a champion of these progressive policies. But it's something that I think about every now and then at the same time.
Thank you, comrade.
Yeah, there was even resistance from Stalin. I mean, it's not a case that it's a, what do you call it, desperate need or anything like that. And I think it just shows the struggle that women have done over the centuries. I say struggle, but I know in the, what do you call it, the early centuries, women were very much more equal in so many societies, including the ancient ones, that I really want to say that this is more of a modern, during our Enlightenment age, where we, like everything else with race, it's the same thing. It's a way of dividing, and especially the power that women had in past centuries, I'm sure was resented. I mean, it's a whole mixed bag. So I don't mean to say that it's an ideology. What I'm saying is we are going to still have to struggle, and I'm amazed at how many successes women did have in their struggles. So, that's all. Maybe we will have the renaissance of women world leaders sometime.
Thank you, comrade. Secretary Emeritus Angelo, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, don't forget in history, people will remember, she was not an oddity. Joan of Arc. She led military formations. When Israel was struggling in the very beginning for its independence from British colonialism, who was leading the country? Golda Meir. This idea is very reactionary. That says a women don't have a history of stepping up to take leadership roles. In Romania, the person who was running the government after World War II was a woman named Anna Parker. Anna Parker, you should do some research on her. P-A-U, I think it's K-E-R. She was another woman that was a leader. The stereotype that the West had against women in the communist movement was that they were not effeminate.
60 seconds.
They were robotic. And From Russia with Love, that movie in the 70s with James Bond, they show you a woman named Anna Koplik or something, and she looked like she was a sergeant in the army. She would click her heels, and out of her toes would come two knives, and she would kill people with it.
90
This was
seconds.
the stereotype. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, comrade Angelo.
Yeah, in researching some of this time period for other projects, unfortunately, in response to the rise of Nazi Germany, there was some chauvinism that was crept back in the Soviet Union, and it was largely, a lot of the backwards elements that came from the old society, as Angelo's mentioned many times, bourgeois baggage came to light, and it didn't just affect women in that scenario. It affected all the parts of society as well. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you, comrade.
Dr. Franco, who was the name of the woman leader in Romania again?
I believe Anna Parkour is what he said.
Paulker.
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Thanks.
Yeah. Keep in mind, the generation that Stalin raised was wiped out. 27 million people. All right. And so it is correct that after Stalin's death and after his whole generation raised by him is gone, that, yeah, things did slip. It was now the oldies and the entrenched leadership that took over. And I think that's why it went astray. So just wanted to add that.
All right, thank you. We will return to the presentation now for time. So our next section is on the Mirabal sisters, and the reader for that section, you have the floor.
All right. So just for some background information, from 1930 to 1960, Rafael Trujillo staged a coup in the Dominican Republic. And to do this, he assassinated all his political rivals in order to gain control. I don't remember if I put this later in the slides, but basically he had a pretty brutal reign, imprisoning anyone who spoke out against him, exiling people, things like that. So the Mirabal sisters are Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa, and they were part of a group that eventually became known as the 4th of June movement in honor of the group of Dominicans that were exiled and then later tried to stage an invasion with the help of Cuba. Minerva was also the first woman to graduate law school, but after rejecting Trujillo's advances, she faced harassment from all of his underlings, and he also denied her her license to practice law. Within the 14th of June movement, the Mirabal sisters gained the code name Las Mariposas, or the Butterflies. While in that movement, they distributed pamphlets, which mostly included the names of Trujillo's victims. They held and attended secret meetings that would help lead the middle class. And one thing to note as well, even though I say the Mirabal sisters, I'm mostly referring to two of them who were the most active. Their third sister was not very active. And Trujillo was the dictator of the Dominican Republic from 1930s until his assassination in 1961, while Francisco Franco ruled Spain as a dictator from 1939 until his death in 1975. The connection between the two can be summarized as ideological similarities. Both leaders adhered to authoritarian and nationalist ideologies, emphasizing strong centralized control, militarism, and conservative social policies. They suppressed political dissent and controlled their countries through oppressive measures. Diplomatic relations, despite being on opposite sides of the Atlantic, Trujillo and Franco maintained diplomatic relations. Trujillo supported Franco during the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, by sending some limited military support and aligning with Franco's nationalists, who eventually won the war. Eventually, their husbands were jailed, and they were given permission to visit them. So Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa were ambushed by Trujillo's men, and the sisters were assassinated and their deaths staged to look accidental. These orders came directly from Trujillo. People knew this was no accidental death, and instead of the sisters no longer being Trujillo's problem, they instead became martyrs. And Trujillo's regime outwardly had a progressive attitude, granting women's suffrage in 1942, but for some people, the assassination was a step too far. And shortly after their death, Trujillo was assassinated. So part of their legacy is that the United Nations declared November 25th as International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women as a tribute to them. And most places in the Dominican Republic have streets or some other type of commemoration dedicated to them, things such as statues or murals. Trujillo had an obelisk created for himself, and the Dominicans replaced it with a butterfly. In the Time of Butterflies by Julia Alvarez is a fictionalized retelling of their story and it was later turned into a movie.
All right. We will break for another round of discussion. Comrade Angelo, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I want to remind everybody, Trujillo was anti-communist, very much so. He wanted his people to love him, so he used the term Papa. And he was a medical doctor, believe it or not. So they called him Papa Doc. That's very important. You should know that. Papa Doc. I find that interesting because lately I've been hearing people talk to me about Trump. You know what they're calling him? Papa Trump. This is a fact. Papa Trump. Papa Trump will take care of us. I think it's interesting. That's all.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's a part that I put in here that if you heard her pause, she was wondering where it went. And it is important that we talk about it. It was the husbands that were arrested, not the wives. And I really don't know why. I'll be able to explain that. So because of and I'm assuming it's because of the wives' activity, not only were their husbands arrested, but they lost everything and they had to go back to their mother's home. So I was always curious, and I apologize this for Leanna when we were putting this together, that I admitted that. And I'm very curious if you know anything more about why Trujillo did it. So
There was never really a concrete answer, although both of their husbands were also in the movement as well. So I think part of it might have just been kind of like happenstance that the husbands got arrested. As for their home getting bombed, I think that might have been because basically Trujillo would have these parties where if you get an invitation, you kind of can't say no. And so obviously the family went, and at that party, Trujillo tried to make advances on the eldest sister, Minerva, and she basically humiliated him in front of everyone, repeatedly rejecting him. And so as a result, he kind of started targeting the family. So that's how they lost their home and then had to move back to their childhood home.
okay, thank you. And quick question: what happened to the husbands that were in jail?
They were not mentioned as much. The focus of all the articles I looked at were the Mirabal sisters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. D'Angelo, did you say like Trujillo was called like Papa Doc? I think that was Duvalier in Haiti who was called Papa Doc, and his son was Baby Doc.
You're correct. It was Duvalier. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We will then go on to our next section. So our next section is the women partisans in Franco's Spain. And the reader of the section, you have the floor.
Thank you. All right, these are women's contributions in the anti-fascist struggle. First up, these are some of the groups that did a lot of work and women did a lot of work in. The first one is the Agrupación de Mujeres Antifascistas, which is the anti-fascist women's group, which was an organization that was founded by the Communist Party of Spain as the Spanish section of the International Organization of Mujeres contra la Guerra y el Fascismo, which is Women Against War and Fascism. And it was initiated by the Communist International following Hitler's rise to power in Germany. It functioned similar to a mass organization and was focused on bringing in the broadest sections of society into the anti-fascist struggle against Franco. It was very influential during the Spanish Civil War, and it encouraged women to actively participate in politics. It started literacy campaigns and political education for women. And it also organized medical brigades food distribution and care for refugees or internal refugees during the war. Another group that did a lot of work during the time during the Civil War was the Juventudes Socialistas Unificadas, the Unified Socialist Youth, which was a youth organization formed in the spring of 1936 in Spain through the amalgamation of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party and the Communist Party of Spain's youth groups, and had many women amongst its ranks. The JSU mobilized thousands of women, young workers, students, and peasants to defend the Spanish Republic. And after the fall of the Republic to Franco's fascist forces, one of the more infamous cases of repression was Las 13 Rosas, which means the 13 Roses, which involved 13 young JSU women who were executed on August 5th, 1939, after the culmination of the Civil War, and were accused of participating in underground resistance against the Francoist regime. I think it's also worth mentioning that was part of a bigger round of executions that also, if I remember correctly, involved 50 or so other men. But yeah. And next up is Vilma Espin. This is Raul Castro's wife, so Fidel Castro's sister-in-law. All right. Vilma Lucia Espin Guyos was born on April 7th, 1930 in Santiago de Cuba as a daughter to a wealthy Cuban lawyer. She graduated after studying chemical engineering at the Universidad del Oriente. This is also where she met Frank País and got involved in politics. After she also studied at MIT in Massachusetts at the request of her father, in an attempt to divert her from socialist politics, but her time in the USA left her with a fire that she used to join the July 26 movement while in Mexico en route to Cuba. So her role in the July 26 movement, which overthrew the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista in Cuba. After the failed Moncada barracks attack by a group including a young Fidel Castro that sent him and his brother into exile after they shortly served a sentence in Cuba. This is where that pair met Espin. Espin served as a key messenger between the July 26 movement leaders in Mexico, which is Fidel and his brother, and Frank País, who was stationed in Cuba, and their underground work against the Bautista regime. She also went on to assist them in the Sierra Maestra, which is mountains, which are in the southern part of Cuba, after the July of 26 movement, and after the return to Cuba on the Gran Maya, which is where 80, or infamously where Fidel and his brother and I think 80 other Cuban revolutionaries landed on the island right before they launched the revolution. Yep, she played a key role in liberating Cuba from the dictatorship of Bautista. After the revolution, she was vowed as Cuba's first lady, as she was Raul Castro's wife and Fidel Castro's sister-in-law. She took an active role in many branches of the Cuban government from the conclusion of the revolution to her death. Espin helped found the Federation of Cuban Women and promoted equal rights for Cuban women in all spheres of life. She played a huge role during the revolution and after in defending their homeland and were an essential part. Celia Sanchez, Hailey Santa Maria, and Melba Hernandez are a few other women comrades who are also active in underground networks from the beginning in Cuba, from the early 1950s up until the revolution, and after the revolution until they died. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, comrade. So with that, though, we will go to our final discussion round. I actually had a question for comrade. My question is, what other roles in the Cuban government after the revolution did Maria Espin have? And was there any other particular standout roles that any other women had within the government of Cuba after the revolution? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what other roles she had exactly in the government. Could find that out for you, but I forgot what was the other question you had?
Yeah, if there was any other roles or significance that other women had in the government of Cuba.
Oh. As to specific women, I'm besides the ones I just named, I'm not sure, but I know that Cuba, at least in their government, around 50% of the people in government are women, or that do play a role in that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can give you a little bit of a background. Vilma, she was a spy, and because all the people, they all knew about the revolution, and so she was warned when there was any kind of Batista's people coming after her. So she survived that. The absolute immediate thing that happened was that uh, the women started working with her and pleading with her to help their position. Their position was horrendous, probably worse than slaves, okay? Again, because of the macho-ness that was prevalent, probably still is prevalent in Latin or South America. So she didn't know what to do, so she went to Fidel, and he said, "Do whatever you want, and you have my okay." So the first thing she did was create a huge training course. She took over one of the mansions, trained in all of the rural women, and they stayed there and taught and learned and did a whole bunch of things. The next thing she did that was amazing was nurseries. She said, "I need 800 nurseries." Now, this was in the major, Havana area. And she got people that worked for free, people that supplied materials. She was an unbelievable force for 40 years after that. She knew childcare was so necessary. They had a whole bunch of orphans from the war, lots of orphans. So in their public schools, everyone wore a uniform, including the orphans. So no one was considered different. Again, her whole life is a testament to what can be done. But they knew her from her struggles. They knew the danger she was in. She was basically the liaison between Mexico and Cuba. She worked under pseudonyms, but they finally figured out who she was, and that's when she was really in danger. So did any other, I would not say any other one, match her prowess? I know her daughter continues her work and is very much loved right now. But she was too much, I think, of a standout. However, she was a force to be reckoned with. And what do you call it? Castro gave her carte blanche on everything. So I don't know if that helps.
Thank you, comrade.
Yeah, just a small shout out to Aleda March, the second wife of Che Guevara. She had a more direct role during the revolution, and was in the battle for Las Villas. After the war, though, she just, I think, settled down, had kids, and became more of a wife. I don't think she had any position in government. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Any other questions or comments? Any other famous women communists that we have not brought up tonight that someone would like to give a little information on? One person I would like to bring up, though she has a bit of a checkered history, Alexandra Kollontai. She was one of the Bolsheviks in the October Revolution and also served on many committees within the Soviet government. Now, she did join the Bolsheviks in 1904, but she left in 1916 over the decision to boycott elections that they took. But she rejoined them later when the Revolution of 1917 broke out. And again, she was also one of those who She joined one of the opposition tendencies in the Bolshevik Party and also protested the banning of factions after the 10th Party Congress in 21. But despite all that, she continued serving the Soviet government within foreign affairs and was one of the heads of and was an ambassador between the USSR and Norway and Sweden, and worked with the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs until her death in 1952. And I believe there is also, she wrote things on the attitudes towards women and some other things, which I'm not sure if there's any collected volumes of her work, but I do know there is some out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up that I just learned that Lenin's wife, Krupskaya, had like a really big role both with him in supporting the Bolsheviks and then also as a big leader of like the education policies of the party. I know she, at the end of her life, she had disagreements with Stalin and so on, but I had no idea that she was a revolutionary before she met Lenin and that she had done so much important work for the Bolsheviks. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Also, later this month, we will be having a class on one of the more famous American communist women, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. So please join us for that. That's going to be a fantastic class as well.
So I was just going to bring up, I'm reading Elizabeth Gurley Flynn's autobiography, Rebel Girl, and it is awesome. She was fascinating. I just think it's really, really great. She's a really good speaker, and I wish I could have heard her speak.
Same here. All right. If there are no more hands, questions, or comments, we will go back to the presentation. I believe it is our wrap-up as well. So, View from Left Field is our new podcast project. The old PSMLS YouTube is now the YouTube for View from Left Field, a podcast of analysis and discussion of current events from a progressive perspective. Please like our YouTube videos and subscribe with 5-star ratings on your favorite podcast platforms. Apple Podcasts, Spotify's, YouTube Podcasts, etc. New Outlook Publishers is our sister publishing house, and for an update on that, I will turn the floor over to Comrade.
Thank you. Please visit our partner publishing house, New Outlook Publishers. You can find a lot of great works, and the website is newoutlookpublishers.store. Of course, most relevant to tonight's class, the PCUSA Women's Commission selected writings. You can find a lot of great works there. Also, look out tonight. I'm a little behind, but tonight you'll see our latest release soon, entitled People's Capitalism, polemic against the concept of people's capitalism by J.M. Budish, that was put out in the 1950s, I believe. And everybody should get this, and it is part of the reading class for the party school. So if you're a party member, once that comes out, please check that out. And once again, you can find that at newoutlookpublishers.store.
And we will close out with the Internationale.
We want no condescending saviors to rule us from a judgment hall. We work as astronauts for their fame.